Welcome back to the final video in our series on teaching conversation. We have looked at the top 5 most important things every ESL teacher should know about teaching conversation, and we have explored how to create the best classroom resources. In this video, we are going to examine a framework for incorporating recorded conversations and transcripts into ESL classroom instruction. Hello, my name is Susan Shostak, and this is Cookies on the Bottom Shelf, Making the Complex Simple. The framework consists of 6 parts and can easily be modified to suit individual classroom needs. In the introduction phase, the instructor leads a discussion to stimulate thinking about the topic of the lesson. The second phase continues the discussion with a focus on cultural comparison and contrast. The third phase includes pre-teaching vocabulary and grammar, and then presenting the recording and transcript for analysis. The fourth phase gives students the opportunity to experiment with the target features in both guided and independent practice. In the fifth phase, students reflect on the process of conversation analysis and things that they have noticed about conversation through that process. The last phase encourages students to record and report back on target features noticed in their daily lives. Now, let's see what this framework looks like in a written lesson plan. In this lesson plan, we are focusing on a group of adult ESL learners who are already out in the work world using their English every day and find that they have some gaps. So these are advanced learners. This lesson plan would be for a group that meets 1 time a week for about 3 hours and again are using their English every day out in the world. All right, so we start with our lesson objectives here. We are expecting that students will be able to identify conversational topics and explain the process of topic management and provide examples from the transcript. You can see that we have a good amount of vocabulary that we need to pre-teach in this lesson, including some idiomatic expressions. We have the need of some technology to play back the recording and to project the transcript up onto a screen or the board. And we will have copies of the transcript for students. And we'll also have, of course, some worksheets and things like that. This begins, as the framework mentions, with an introduction. This would include some questions that students would answer using a think, pair, share technique, and that would be followed up with some additional questions to compare and contrast culture as it relates to the business conversation that is the focus of this lesson. In the teacher input section, this is the beginning of the transcript analysis, but all transcript analysis in ESL classrooms should begin with making sure that students understand the meaning of the talk. Make sure that there are no interferences from unknown vocabulary, unknown grammar, and that sort of thing. So all of that should be pre-taught. Students should really understand the message of the communication before you start looking at the organization of the talk. The next part of the lesson plan, and the biggest part of the lesson, of course, is the transcript analysis. Students would listen to the recording and follow along on the transcript, and we would play that 2 or even 3 times. We can play it, we can repeat that audio recording throughout the lesson. We can stop and go back and listen to it again, and that's certainly something that anyone would want to do as they're analyzing a piece of talk, analyzing a transcript. So there's no rule about how many times you can play that recording. Just play that as many times as students need to hear it. In this lesson plan, the focus of the transcript analysis will be on topic management. In any piece of talk, there's going to be a lot of different things happening. There are going to be hesitation devices. There's going to be conversational repair. There'll be nonverbal communication if you happen to have the video to go along with it. And certainly all of those things are important. And like you would do with any lesson, you want to focus on one part first. You might go to those other pieces later, but you certainly don't want to try to give them everything at once. So all of the questions that we see here have to do with the topic management. So of course, here you see the comprehension questions, as I mentioned earlier, making sure they do understand. But here we go into the topic management focus, and we review how topic management is normally done in conversations. So perhaps that would have been taught at an earlier time. And there are just a number of questions here to guide students through analyzing the transcript. This is the transcript that students would receive. And you can see this is a business conversation recorded in New Mexico, and Brad and Phil are board members of a local art society. Each of the lines has been numbered so that it's easy for everyone in the class, including the teacher, to refer to various lines to be able to describe what's happening. So we have labeled the transcript with things like overlap. So when you see the conversation here or the talk in brackets like this, we know that there's some overlap here. There's some more overlap here. Any place you see that. In this case, the talk starts here. There's a bit of overlap and some additional overlap. There's overlap throughout. It's simply how people talk in a normal fashion. Keep in mind that if you're labeling your own, or if you've edited a transcript, as I've edited this one from the Santa Barbara Corpus of Spoken American English, the overlap is not going to be exact. And it's really tough to get it exact. I don't know that you really need to have it so exact for an ESL class, as long as you can show that in this particular part of the conversation there was overlap. And certainly in class you can, if it seems relevant, you can discuss how that overlap occurred. Okay. Because I think it's relevant to those of you watching this video who are new to transcript analysis, new to conversation analysis, and perhaps you're wondering how in the world do you even begin to make sense of this. Certainly you want to read through the transcript a number of times, listen to the recording a number of times as you prepare your lesson and you prepare this particular teaching resource. You're going to interact with this recording and this transcript quite a lot, and the more you do, the more you'll understand about what's happening in the talk. You'll notice things. That whole noticing part of what makes this so effective as a teaching technique will impact you as a teacher as well as your students. So I thought it would be beneficial for you to see the notes that I made on the transcript for myself as I was preparing for this lesson. Before I didn't start the lesson thinking I'm going to do a lesson on topic management. I found this transcript and I thought this transcript is very interesting. I like the fact that it's a business conversation. A lot of my students are business people. This is going to be very interesting to them. And so I chose the transcript, and then I said, now let's go and look at the transcript and see what's already there. What's there that would be meaningful to share with my students. So I'm really letting the transcript drive the lesson rather than the other way around. If you have a particular thing in mind that you want to teach, and then you go out looking for transcripts that that evidence that, you might find it, but it can be very frustrating. I think it's easier and more efficient to do it the other way. Just find good transcripts with good content, and then let that speak to you and to your students about how that conversation is organized. So in this one, the piece of talk that we're looking at starts with an offer of closure, and the closure begins with, or you see some back channeling in the closure, which is normal. And then you see here, Phil says, I know that you're getting ready to leave, and Pat's doing things, so I'd better, he's saying, I better let you go. And so Phil kind of starts initiating that closing, and Brad's the one who has to go, right? And you can see that things are beginning to wind down. Yeah, well, there's nothing really important happening there. But then suddenly Brad, the one who has to go, very interestingly, says, and he kind of interrupts Phil, and he raises his voice as indicated by these capital letters. And he says, one thing that comes to mind is, and he changes the topic. And we know from the research that topic change at conversation closure is very, very common. And here's a wonderful piece of evidence to support that. All right, so we have introduction of a new topic. This goes along until there's another change in topic with the committees. And this time it's Phil, and committees is related back to what they're talking about. So new topic connected to the old topic. Again, very common way of changing a topic. There's a big out-breath here. In the original transcript, there were lots of breaths, in-breaths and out-breaths that were noted, and I edited most of that out of the transcript because some of them were imperceptible to me as a novice listening to the recording, and I did not feel that it would add a lot to an ESL class to talk about in-breaths and out-breaths. But sometimes it's good to include. In this case, I actually, instead of, they had a symbol for that. Instead, I just wrote big out-breath because it's almost a sigh. You have Phil talking about, they need to become somewhat self-sufficient, collections committee is going to start talking about money here. And you have Brad with his big out-breath, like, and you can tell, oh gosh, maybe he doesn't want to talk about it, or it seems futile or whatever. There's some disagreement here. Well, and then there's laughter. And again, we know that sometimes when people want to disagree, but not ruffle feathers too much, there is laughter involved. There's another topic change here. And this particular topic change is, again, it's very classic, very textbook, where you see a previous topic that's really exhausted. There's an increase in back channeling, and you have the new topic. Here, Phil interrupts himself, and so is this, and then he interrupts, we met another person by the name of Bill Ashby. He interrupts himself because he realizes that Brad might not know Bill Ashby, and so he corrects himself by now including the full name of the individual instead of just the first name. And then we have another example of conversational repair here. And then he stops and says, what I'm anticipating doing, which is just a perfect example of, he realizes he's being a little too strong and he wants to back up and go, no, what I'm anticipating doing. So it's, just a fantastic example of repair. We have another raised voice here. And in this overlap, Brad raises his voice to take the floor. It's actually the second time in this transcript that Brad raises his voice to take the floor, and it kind of makes you wonder about that relationship, that the power dynamic between Brad and Phil. That Brad feels like he has to raise his voice to take the floor. It might be his personality, or it might be that he finds it difficult to take the floor when talking with this person. There's an introduction of here the notion of term limits for these board members. So he feels kind of introducing another new topic. And when he introduces that notion of term limits, you also notice here that Brad essentially stops talking. And now it's really only Phil who's talking. And then there's some finished utterances and another attempt by Phil to change the topic. And suddenly Brad just interrupts and says, I've got to run. So either he realizes he's really late, or he doesn't want to talk about term limits. He's kind of, he's just done with talking about that or whatever. But there's a number of reasons why he suddenly interrupts, and that would be great for classroom discussion. Also, earlier Phil had invited Brad to lunch, and this time, and it would just be later within just a few hours from their conversation. And Phil says, "Okay, see you, Brad." And "see you, Brad" is what we say when we don't know when we're going to see somebody next. And Brad says, but the lunch, and you see, wait, I thought we were going to lunch, so there's some confusion there. And then there's some laughing, and they seem to get it all sorted out. After finishing the transcript analysis and all the questions and the discussion and all of that sort of thing, now it's time to do some practice with the students. And again, this transcript analysis is not for the purpose of getting students to imitate necessarily the exact wording of the transcript. And certainly they're not going to do like a reading of the transcript in the way that you traditionally see dialogues recited from textbooks. This is not anything remotely like that. In this case, we're looking at how the conversation is structured, and we want students to practice using that organizational structure that they've seen in the conversation. And so in the first practice, there will be a fill in the blank worksheet with what we call shift phrases, meaning how, words that we use to change the topic. And then there will be a role play with where they can take some of those scenarios from the worksheet and expand on them to create some kind of role play. And you'll see in the lesson plan that I mentioned, they can write things down. But when they perform that, they really should not be reading from a script. This really needs to be as much as they can thinking about what they're saying and really putting into practice those organizational pieces from that you're looking at in this case topic management. There's a reflection piece at the end, the application piece. These are all the parts of the framework that was mentioned earlier, and the worksheet for filling the blanks that I just mentioned is here. So there's a list of common phrases that we use when we change topic, and then they've got 4 different workplace related tiny conversations. Now these are contrived. Again, I've included a little bit of overlap because we want to try to incorporate sort of the reality of that anywhere we can. But this is an example of when you need to contrive something because you really need to practice that one individual bit, right? And so what we'd want is for students to work together or independently to fill in that blank with one of these that seems to make sense. They should be able to give reasons for why they chose what they did. And then for the role play, they can choose one of these scenarios with another student, or a group of students can choose, for example, here at number 4, the meeting, and then they can, expand that and begin to think about where in the conversation would they normally change topic. I think for this role play activity, we require them to change topics 3 times. Brad and Phil changed topics 5 times in 3 minutes. So those were native speakers, obviously. I think asking your students to come up with 3 topic changes in just a few minutes of talk is not too hard. And that is the end of our 9 video series on teaching conversation. I hope that you have found this to be helpful and something that you feel you can incorporate into your lesson plans on a fairly regular basis. Thank you for watching, and have a great teaching semester. Happy teaching!